So we all set? Okay. Hi, everybody. First of all, hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Thank you for making time for us. This is something that is part of our series 1A Across America, where we're trying to have conversations in different parts of the country that don't usually get to be part of the political conversation leading up to an election year, and talk about some things that don't usually get talked about even in election years. And we thought that this would be a perfect topic to discuss when we're here in the Twin Cities for a lot of not only political reasons, but also cultural reasons. And I don't know the last time that you heard an hour with Somali Americans telling their own story, but I haven't heard one. So we figured that now is a good time to do one. Mukhtar Ibrahim, let me start with you. You just launched Sahan Journal this summer. The website describes the journal as, quote, a nonprofit digital newsroom dedicated to providing authentic news reporting for and about immigrants and refugees in Minnesota, unquote. How did Sahan Journal come about?
First of all, Joshua, thank you for having us and welcome to Minnesota. My name is Mukhtar Ibrahim. I am the head of Sahan Journal. It's a nonprofit news organization that covers immigrants and refugees in Minnesota. This project has been something that I have been running for a while, since 2013. It was a project that was covering issues related to Somalis in Minnesota, Somalis in the diaspora, and Somalis in East Africa. And as I was doing that, I realized a lot of people were hitting the website and they were hungry for the kind of content we were producing at the time. And after a couple of years, I got busy. I married and I had kids, and I went to graduate school, and I dedicated more time to my career working in traditional newsrooms. So that project kind of went off the side, and I came back to it in 2018. And we officially launched like 2 weeks ago. We went live on August 11th. And the idea is to really tell the stories of immigrants and refugees in Minnesota, tell their successes, challenges, and transformations. And I realized that the traditional mainstream newsrooms were not really interested or putting enough resources into going into communities that are different from them. So we are just trying to change the narrative and shaping our own narrative and writing our own stories.
What is that narrative that you're trying to change? How do you see the conventional narrative of Somali Americans, particularly here in and around the Twin Cities?
Well, I think the news coverage about my community usually tends to be on the negative side. You hear about our issues when they are mostly negative, when something happens, when someone gets shot or killed, when there's a big news event surrounding us, and then the media moves on to the next thing, and the next time they come back is when something bad happens. And the only thing that you will get from the Somali community when you are not from that community, when you are hearing about the issues, is something that's usually negative. And we want to kind of go beyond that, go beyond the service, and tell more nuanced, comprehensive stories that are really authentic and that are true to ourselves, and just kind of be the outlet that is the go-to source of news and information about the immigrant community and Somalis and everyone in Minnesota.
Well, hopefully we can bring a clearer, better narrative to the nation through this conversation. And I do want to start to kind of just give our audience a sense of who you are, what your background is, and what you do here in the Twin Cities. How many of you, just by show of hands, were born in the United States? Everyone here came to the United States, born in Somalia or, okay. I'd be interested to know how some of you came to the United States, what your story was in terms of how you arrived, both in the U.S. and in the Twin Cities. Introduce yourself, please.
Oh, well, my name is Muhammad Barre, and I live northeast Minneapolis, Virginia. Arlington is my first state. Arlington County and Arlington City was my first city. Virginia was my first state. I moved here because of education. I work for Hennepin County, and I have been with Hennepin County close to 15 years. The reason why I came here is because of the war that happened back home in 1991. I consider myself, as well as the gentleman sitting over there, the first influx that came here, the first refugees that came and settled in the United States of America. The purpose of coming here was to educate myself, to go to school, which I never, I may not have that chance when I was still in Virginia. So that's the reason. Well, I went to school, I raised children, and I'm here with this conversation, being part of the community, to represent my own perspective, the perspective of the community, the way I see. What was your question?
Well, yeah, there's a very energetic group who clearly loves your story on the other side of this wall. What did you encounter when you came to America, to Arlington, right?
Arlington, Virginia.
What did you encounter? What were those early months and years like for you?
Well, the first encounter that I had was, America. I was in the middle of America, left and right, thinking, what the future is going to bring to me. And I was fortunate to have sponsors who are mainly from Virginia. And one thing I remember from them is they told me that we will help you if you can help yourself. And I said, well, how can I help myself? I'm new here. I'm here in a few weeks. And they said, it's not that. We will help you if you show us that you're looking for a job. You're going to wake up every morning and look for a job. If you want to go to school, you wake up every morning and go to school. Then we will help you. We will get involved with your life, with your sister. My sister came with me at that time. By the way, tonight, as I'm speaking here, she is in Ukraine. She is receiving her doctor's degree in Ukraine. So they said, we will help you if you help yourself. So those are the first words that I heard. And those are the things that I thought about. How am I going to establish myself in America, live a life that I wanted, go to school, work, and be part of the society, which is what I'm still doing.
Other stories about how you came to the U.S.? Yes, introduce yourself.
My name is Nadia Mohammed. I came here when I was 10 with my family. It was my dad, my mom, and my 4 other siblings. We again fled from the war over there. And another thing was my brother's autistic, and one of the medication here, or it was better here, and just for him to have a better treatment, and also for your kids to have an education worth having. And one of the downsides of a war is the school system goes to the school system doesn't exist. But and so when we came here, I think within a month we went straight to school, and I remember I didn't speak any English. And one of the fascinating things was even when I was going to school in Somalia, everything was in Arabic. So I came here fluent in Arabic and fluent in Somali. And as the years go on, and another fun fact was I was failing English in Somalia. So when I came here, I forgot all my Arabic, but I'm speaking fluent English now. So yeah.
So you've really Americanized.
Yeah. I wish my English teacher in Somalia could hear me now. But so it was just and one of the weird, as I only have flashbacks of my life in Somalia and my life here when I first got here. But one of the vivid things was how different everything was, and how even cup food smelled so weird to me. Cup food is the weirdest smell. But that's just one of the things I remember. But and it was just
well, I'm sorry, elaborate on that. This weird smell. Elaborate on that.
It was I wouldn't say that it was a bad smell, but it was a smell that I was not familiar with. It was just it was cold, and it was just I didn't like going to Cup Foods for a while. It took me a while. I could have been me being spoiled, who knows? But I cannot explain more than it was it was an unfamiliar smell, and that's one of the things.
And explain what that is for people who don't know.
Cup Foods? Oh, it's a major
grocery
whole
store.
food grocery store.
Gotcha.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. They don't have food? They don't have Cup Foods?
No, they
everywhere?
don't.
That's not a brand I'm familiar with.
Oh, wow.
It's different in every state.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow, okay.
So just it was weird, going to supermarkets and just the things that the day-to-day life that Americans
Day-to-day
just
life,
take for granted.
Yeah. And so it was just and also knowing, I remember there was I had friends in school, but I don't remember how I was communicating with them. And it's just that childhood innocence that goes on and that just goes on with being a child. And one of the main things is when you grow up and you start to process what's going on. I didn't know I was Black until I came to America. And it's weird, but I didn't know I was Black before I came to America. I knew I was practicing Muslim. I knew I was a woman. I knew the things, but I didn't know I was Black until I came to America.
So that cultural line was new for you when you got here.
Yeah. So it was because like it was just like that, like yeah, it's. I will come up with what I'm trying to say.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
please do. And it's,
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating how you kind of, you, Mohammed, talked about learning about this kind of self-initiative, this self-drive that is very much associated with being an American.
Yeah.
And you, Nadia, came learning about some of the cultural fault lines and the nature of the culture here in America, good,
Yeah.
bad, and otherwise. What about other people's stories of how you came to this country and what you kind of discovered? Yes, introduce yourself.
My name is Haji Yusuf, and I host I run a podcast called The Haji Live on YouTube and Facebook. Just to add on what Nadia said, I think our biggest wow moment was when we all saw how cold is Minnesota. The snow, and just being curious about it, because we all come from warm places that we never seen snow before.
And I'm from Florida, so I can totally, yeah.
Yes, and more than anything, also, before we even talk about how Somalis got here, we need to know the backstory. Apart from the explaining the civil war, in many parts of Africa, which is very important, and that's how people got here, but also the fights, the civil rights acts of the 60s really was part of the fight to bring African states, if there was a conflict, to bring them over here to the United States. Because as you know the history of this country, there was a certain point only people from Europe were coming here from late 1900s, 1920s, all the way down. There was certain countries in Europe that people were being allowed to enter, but not from Africa or Latin America. And I think part of the fight to have Somali Americans and all Africans, recently arriving Africans, to come to this state or to come to this country was because of the sacrifices that was done by people like Martin Luther King and civil acts movements and all that. If it wasn't for them, we will not be here. So I have to acknowledge that and to accept that reality that this is why we're here. That's very important for me.
I imagine that with that reality, that adds more, maybe not pressure, more meaning, more weight for
Right.
someone like you when you come to the U.S. kind of knowing what the backstory was that allowed you to be here.
I didn't know that when I was coming.
Ah.
I had my idea of America was watching hip hop videos and watching Rambo and what's his name, Sylvester Stallone, Rambo and Chuck Norris. That was my idea growing up in Africa. This is the idea out of America. Music, hip hop, all this good life, all that. And then when I came here, is then like what Nadia said, oh, I'm actually in a group of people, right? That I left behind another reality and I come to a new reality, right? That introduced me to that I am someone else that I'm not, and that I have to be curious to find out, well, if I'm not that person that I left and I'm here, how do I move forward? And the only way to do that is to immerse yourself in the history and the culture and everything. And part of that curiosity was learning about the African American history, going back and knowing that, oh, is this why now I'm being defined as this new person?
Were there any particular turning points? Were there any particular turning points for you, Haji, in terms of getting acclimated and getting to know the culture that kind of made America click for you?
Yes, sometimes things happen, I think, sometimes for a reason. And you get to a point where you're like, first when you come here, you're like, why are all these people not, why are they complaining about racism? Why are they complaining about being stereotyped? I mean, they can get a job, they can get a car, they can do all these things. I can do whatever, and you got that swagger, like you're just a new guy and you're like, I want to work, I want to do this. And then you get into a world and then the reality hits you on the face and you're like, just another black person that has come to the US, and that all these opportunities, someone is standing on the way, either directly or indirectly, and you can clearly see that. And I think very few people quickly realize that, very few people, catch on to that, and I think being part of that, being curious, I think really, kind of pushed me to that direction and made me realize that I'm in a totally different place.
Nadia?
I think I couldn't have said it better, and that's what I meant. Like, I found out that I was black when I came to, like, because, like, when we were in Africa, like, you're all black, you're all African American, you're all Africans, and you come here and you go to school and you realize, okay, here's where I'm different, you know what I mean? And it's usually the first thing that they notice about you is the color you're wearing. And now I'm also visibly Muslim, which is another, like, thing I had to, like, navigate through. So there's these two cultures that are, like, constantly, like, and we were talking about this, but it's constantly, like, clashing because they couldn't be any more different, you know what I mean? Because America as a culture is very liberal, and Somalia as a culture is very conservative. So, like, it was just, like, combining the beliefs and just kind of realizing, okay, there's racism. I mean, no matter how hard I work, and my mom is constantly telling me, like, you can do anything, without, like, realizing, there's hurdles and there's, like, things that are going to be that are going to stop me either directly or indirectly. Yeah.
Can I build off of what Nadia is saying? I'd love to hear from some more of you we haven't
Yes.
heard from yet in terms of feeling welcome here and how welcome you do or do not feel in the Twin Cities, in Minnesota, and what influences that. How welcome do you feel here?
I think
Haji?
Yusuf, again, I think Jelani is just holding back.
I'll let you in just a second. Go ahead, Haji.
He's getting all the ideas, putting them together. I know Jelani. I think I moved here 99 March. I remember that very well. I was flying over Chicago, and the pilot said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is flight, and on your left is Lake Michigan, and I'm like, where is the lake? It's all covered in snow." I'm like, what is he talking about? There's a lake, And I get off in Chicago, and I take a Greyhound bus, and I drive to Minneapolis. And I remember my first stop was a cup food, like you said. First stop was cup food, and it was early March, so the snow is kind of, getting out there. And it was few of us, and I remember 4 years later, I remember, and I don't know if you remember, Jelani, but they used to have billboards all over buses saying the new group of people who are coming. Do you remember? I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
There's billboards of Somali women and men, basically, wearing their cultural clothes. They had them on bus stops, informing the community in Minneapolis that there is a new group of immigrants that will be joining us soon, and welcome them.
So it wasn't like warning people. It was saying, hey, these people are coming, welcome them.
Welcome them, yeah.
Gotcha.
It was an open, colorful pictures, that basically was introducing the Somali migration to Minneapolis and telling them, I don't know if any of you remember that, but,
When was that? Can you put like a year?
I think I'll say between 2001 to 2005. And it wasn't a lot of Somali community population then, people were still moving in, coming in. The migration came in later on, 2008, 2009. It was more and more people arriving. And that was, for me, what I know as welcome, that I was appreciative of the fact that, that the established community that were living here, that were being told that there's going to be a group of people who are coming and we must welcome them. And then this is how I felt welcome in Minnesota, personally.
I wonder if I could ask you to jump in on that one. Introduce yourself, please.
My name is Halima Ahmed. I'm a student at Hamline University in St. Paul. I live in North Minneapolis, and I'm the co-leader of the Muslim Student Association at Hamline. For me, my journey to Minnesota was through my family. I was born in Kenya in 1998, and a couple months after I was born, in about December, we moved to the United States. And the first place we stopped was, and this is all through stories, with Somali people, the way we connect with each other is through oral history. And so for us, we lived with this white family in Coon Rapids. And the stories I hear about them is that they were very welcoming, and they took my family to churches and took them to like dinners and stuff, and they were very welcoming. And then a couple months later, my family had to move out and go out on their own. And for me, growing up here, the American dream and what being American meant was being less Somali and letting go a bit of my culture so I can fit in more at school. Maybe for me, what cool meant was not speaking so much Somali, speaking English more, letting go of that that little bit of an accent you have when you speak another language. And so that's what the American dream meant for me.
So you had to learn how to code switch.
Yeah, definitely. When I was at home, you know, I moved from speaking more Somali to speaking more English, and my mom would have a hard time understanding. She'd be like, Halima, speak more Somali, I don't know what you're saying. And so there was that disconnect with me and my mom sometimes. I'd be like, I want to speak more English, you know, because that's what everybody's speaking. It's not that cool to speak Somali and speak another language. People think you're weird, or they think that you are just not like everybody else. And so that's what it meant for me. So my family's journey here and what like the American dream meant for me was shedding a bit of my culture, becoming more American, whatever that means. And sometimes that, I mean, for me, that meant just being less of who you were so you can fit into this idea.
I wonder if, in a way, being more American meant being more white.
Yeah, you know, sometimes, well, not sometimes, that's how I felt. Like, the more white I sound, the more white I act, maybe I could be like them. That's how I felt when I was younger. So I was like, let me just get away from, you know, I don't want to act like these people or talk like these people. Let me act more like these people. You know what I mean? Because they're the ones who control everything. They're the ones who dominate everything. And if I could maybe sound like them or act like them, I could maybe join them up there. That's how I felt when I was younger. And of course, as I got older, I was like, no, that's not how you go about things. And I feel like as I left that sheltered, that younger sheltered me, as I navigated through high school and college, I learned to be more comfortable in who I was, in my identity, in my culture. And recently I started taking back my language. I want to learn more about being Somali, about my history, about my culture, because it's beautiful. You know, being Somali is an amazing thing.
Jaylani, I'd love you to chime in on this in terms of feeling welcome here in the Twin Cities. I'm hearing a lot of different factors that I don't think are unique to Somali American immigrants, but I think a lot of immigrants encounter them in a variety of different ways. But I'd love for you to introduce yourself and then pick up on this idea of what Somali Americans have to do, change, acculturate to, pick up, let go in order to fit in here. First of all, introduce yourself.
Jaylani Hussein, Executive Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE, Minnesota. Thanks, Joshua. And this is a really wonderful conversation. Thank you for bringing the Somali story. You know, as others have mentioned, my family immigrated here in 1993 in Minnesota. We had a choice between Atlanta and Minnesota, and we had a relative who was here from the late 70s who was an exchange student. So he was our ticket here. And I remember even as a younger child, just as everybody's mentioning, realizing that it was further up north than the equator, and it was going to be cold. And again, all of us had that experience. But I remember that, and this is a question that a lot of people ask, you know, assimilation, integration. What does that look like for the Somali community, whether you came in 1993 or earlier, or you came 2017? And it's a little different. I would share a very similar experience that I also was wondering why, when I walked on Lake Street, which is one of our corridors here in the Twin Cities, when I see African-American gentlemen walking in front of me saying, hello, brother, or, how you doing, brother? And I was like, what's going on here? Like, and their welcome was completely much different than the other folks that I interacted with, or, you know, who also welcomed us by opening their church to us and giving us items and help as being refugees. And in Minnesota, we do have a very gentle, passive-aggressive, but also very gentle, very welcoming community. That's Norwegians who say thank you and hello. We open the doors for each other. We say oops before we, you know, say excuse me. And so, but at the same time, I would say that there's still some struggles. There are communities in St. Cloud and rural Minnesota that the interactions sometimes feels like you are in the deep south in maybe the 70s or 80s. To some extent, where people are treated very differently, given the harsh look. And especially for our community, we hear it a lot from the women who get both the microaggression and microaggressions of the looks. You know, I saw a woman here on a summer hot day a few years ago wearing a winter coat, and I was like, what in the world is going on here? And I asked her, so, you know, my wife and I, we actually gave her a ride to her home, and we asked, why are you wearing a winter jacket in the middle of the summer? And she said, because people would look at me and identify that I'm a Muslim, and then they would say things to her. And this is a woman that was only in the country for less than 2 years.
So she was wearing it to cover her hijab, her headscarf.
Not necessarily her headscarf, but her body, because she was wearing a long hijab that was flowing and that would be easily identifiable as she walks. And so wearing a coat, it's hard to see whether you're wearing a hat or not.
She was literally hiding
Yes.
who she was.
Yes. And that exists, and that was in Minneapolis and St. Paul. That was in the suburbs. So, but at the same time, I would say that compared to other communities, I think the resiliency of the Somali community plays well into kind of without excuse walking into spaces and saying we're here. And a lot of times when people say how are Somalis integrating or assimilating, and sometimes they say, my response is always, have you actually had a conversation with us? Because the reality is most of us, the day we land, and that would be true for a lot of people, you become a little bit of Minnesotan every single day, and you start speaking like a Minnesotan, you start eating like a Minnesotan. But what is a Minnesotan before the Somalis came, and what is it now? And I would say Minnesota is enriched by the Hmong population that are here, the East African population that has come here. So I'm looking forward to the day when people come to Minnesota and they eat a sambuse, which is a triangle-filled egg roll that is beautifully delicious, called samosa in other places.
It is so good.
Right?
We had some before this
Right.
event. I'm enjoying this conversation, but I'm eyeing the table.
Right,
over
right,
in the corner.
right. And so, like a sambusa would be something that Minnesotans are proud of, and not only that, it would be something Minnesotans share with the rest of the country because of that identity of being part of Somali culture, part of the Minnesota culture. And so there are other positive things that do exist, but I would say Minnesota and the uniqueness, I think, in the Twin Cities is the visibility of the Muslim population. And that is really remarkably due to the nature of the how Somali, particularly our women and our men, are very visible, proud to be Muslims.
Well, that's kind of, Mukhtar, what I'm interested in. I do want to keep working my way around, but to that point, Mukhtar, I'm curious if we should frame this conversation about being Minnesotan or about living in the Twin Cities. Because I wonder how much of Minnesota feels like Minneapolis, St. Paul, in terms of being able to build an enclave, acclimate, connect with people, find your way. Like, are we really just talking about the Twin Cities, or are we talking about the whole state of Minnesota?
Right, and I think Haj Yusuf will kind of give us more context about things that are happening outside the Twin Cities. He has lived in St. Cloud for 15 years, had 3 kids there. But when we talk about the Minnesota and Twin Cities in particular, I think, you have this growing community that's really vibrant, that has its own successes and challenges as any other community. And kids are graduating from high school, from colleges, and we're going into the workforce. We're enriching these spaces that haven't had Somali or a Muslim person before. And I think people are kind of recognizing that as people go into the workforce, and things are really changing in Minnesota. And if you look at the demographics of the state, that's rapidly changing. 9% of the population in Minnesota is foreign born. And we are not counting, first generation, second generation immigrants. And that is rapidly changing, and we are seeing that immigrants are really contributing to the population growth that Minnesota is seeing. We are, the forecast says Minnesota will lose 1 congressional seat, and I think the hope is that these new immigrants will prevent that from happening. But I think I will let Haj Yusuf kind of speak about the issues that are happening in St. Cloud, because he has more in-depth experience
Please,
in there.
And I think not only St. Cloud, but just outside Twin Cities area. But before I do that, I just want to add one more thing. I just add a point to that I've just mentioned, is that so the issue I talked about, discrimination and what I've seen, right? It has led, this is happening to the Somali American community, who are part of African American community, and I usually don't like separate the two. I wanna, but for now, because of this, we'll say Somali American community. With that, how has the Somali American dealt with rejection or discrimination? What they have done is they have open their own malls where their kids and their families and everyone can go because they didn't feel welcome to the other malls, or they felt like they were being pushed out. So they had these beautiful shopping centers that they have built called Somali malls that people go in, in any occasion on the weekends. I mean, you will see people having coffee, tea, Somali tea outside, having conversation, updating each other, what's going on in our Twin City area, even outside, even nationally, internationally as well. Talk about politics. Of course, Somali Americans are also very, very much visible in a lot of Starbucks around Twin City area and many other places. And then the visibility of having being represented at 3 levels of governments. And I'm talking about city council, we're talking about state representative. We have 2. We have 1 city councilman, and now we have a congresswoman who's a Somali American representing us on a national level. So that brings a visibility. Now going back to St. Cloud and surrounding areas. So the story is similar. The immigration story is similar to Twin Cities. So secondary migration from Twin Cities to these small towns, right? Because Twin Cities, it's jobs are usually high. You must be really have a certain education level to be able to get some job. Yeah, there is handy jobs here and there. There is some jobs that you can do in Twin City area, but with the Somali, especially parents and older generation and even younger that have not been able to go to school, they always want to find a job and a very cheaper way of life. And so they go to places like St. Cloud, where you have they have Jenny. It's a factory. It's a processing plant for turkey, chicken, and all these things, right? And other also, light, heavy to light industry, so they do the handwork, right? And they get paid and they live there. And so Somali oral community, like you said, culturally, we used to meet at the watering hole, generations of camel herders, communities and clans just will meet somewhere, and we talk about what's going on, where is dry, where is wet, where do we take the animals, so nomadic way of life. And this is also really translated here as well. So we have conversation about where there's opportunity. We talk to someone in Maine and say, hey, what's going on? Hey, Minnesota, come to St. Cloud, there's jobs there. Hey, in Ohio, and then all the way back to Africa, when we know that we have sponsors we are sponsoring our families and they're coming and say, hey, you want to go to St. Cloud, because that's where you want to start.
So there's a real network going.
Right, really, So, and now, so I told you about when you have these bus stops that are welcoming, that wasn't the case to most of these small city towns, Unknown to that is when people moved in, people became more visible, and the established community or the native community see these people who are coming in huge numbers, and they're like, what is going on? So they don't know how to start that conversation, Of course, there's language barriers, cultural barriers, so many other barriers, and it's bound to be conflict, between those communities. And you have, the established community saying, we don't want these people, we don't want them here, they're taking our jobs, they're taking this, And now Jelani and I, so many people, and Mukhtar and many other people have been part of that conversation, trying to say, no, that we're trying to mend this fence, and trying to have this conversation on reality on what's going on in many parts of this series. And then there's September 11. And then you have a community that is black, the community that is Muslim, very visible. And then September 11 comes, and then what? Things start getting worse. The tension is high, and then the Iraq War. So you have these rural communities. They have never had a contact with the Muslim population, all right, or Somali population or Somali communities. Their first contact is recent. There's no historical contact. That's what I mean. And all the story that they hear about Muslims and Somalis is what is on TV, and they see car bombs in Baghdad, they see suicide bombing in Somalia and many other parts, and they're like, whoa, they connected too and say, whoa, what's going on? And then you have hateful preachers that are coming from places like in California and many other places that go to these rural towns in Minnesota and start talking about this hate, this untruth about Islam, about Sharia law, about bringing diseases and not wanting this community to be here. And all these rural people are like, okay, identifying this recently arriving immigrant group as the enemy. You can add on that, Jelani.
Well, I was just going to say, I think Haji brought up really couple of important points. One, I would say that the largest shift of population of Somalis coming to Minnesota actually happened during the economic downturn, when jobs were not easy to get by. That's when we saw a huge shift, and many people moved to rural communities again where those jobs were at. And in fact, the Lake Street that I mentioned has been revived by Latinos and Somalis here right in Minneapolis.
This kind of major artery that's right near where we're having
this
our
conversation
Yeah.
today. And also in rural communities, the entire main streets that have been completely shuttered and closed off, Somalis and Latinos have revived small downtowns that have died off. And so this community is going to places because they want to live, they want to survive, but the connection and the vibrantness between the communities is important. But one thing I want to say is that what we're seeing now when it comes to hate is really more around organized hate. It's small groups of people who are organizing against our community that are creating this fear, that are bringing these anti-Muslim speakers. For example, one of our mosques was bombed just about a year and a half ago. And we know that it didn't just happen in a vacuum. In fact, there's a neighborhood organization of one or two people who've created this fear, who've targeted this mosque that got picked up by the national network of hate groups across this country, who then had 3 militiamen from Illinois drive 6 hours to bomb this mosque in the middle of the night. And so one of the things I want people to really know that is most people, and I've said this a lot, in Minnesota, most people are good people. They don't mean harm to individuals, but their silence against these small groups of people who are organizing within their own community on something that is so profoundly wrong makes them responsible, I would say. And that is really what we're trying to fight against. And I argue even in St. Cloud has a rich Catholic history. And their concerns of Muslim takeover was what their community went through. Mm-hmm. And the same people who their grandparents and their great-grandparents were being treated horribly because of their religion are today doing the exact same thing to Muslims without realizing that history is repeated.
And that is to add, and John F. Kennedy was a Catholic, and he was running for president.
Yeah, there was a Catholic Sharia.
Right, and so they were afraid that the Pope will come here and replace John F. Kennedy as president. So there was that fear of Catholics and many other communities that came to the system.
I think Mohammed wants to add.
Yep.
Yes, and also, before I come back to you, Mohammed, I would love to hear, as we continue this conversation, what you would like to see done, what could make a difference, what maybe you've seen that makes a difference in terms of kind of piercing some of this. But let's go to Mohammed and then Nadia. Mohammed?
Well, this is a recorded conversation. 100 years from now, it will be on record. That's what I think. People will listen. We have to be very careful creating a fear. When I say that, what I mean is, I don't know what the community leaders know about, but as far as most of the families, people like me, the silent majority, we do our business. We go out, take care of our families, as Mukhtar indicated. So Minnesota, I cannot speak for every Somali, and I cannot speak for every city. But one thing I know is I have been here in Twin Cities, Minnesota. The community here are very helpful when it comes to issues about, supporting the community. So I don't know, Jailani, where you're getting your numbers, but things may happen. However, one thing I know is the people in Twin Cities are very helpful, very friendly, and have been supporting the community for a long time. I haven't seen, issues, that stands out. Miscellaneous stuff can happen along the road, street, neighborhood, stuff like that. But the community in general, Minnesota, there is a lot to appreciate. We can talk about the negative aspect, but because that's what makes in news. But the positive aspect that the Minnesota people need to hear is that they are very helpful, very welcoming, very supportive to our community and other communities as well.
Let me hear from Nadia, and then Halima, I'd like you to jump in. Nadia?
So I very much was with what Halima was saying with the two cultures and just kind of in a way of assimilating. There was a point I came here when I was 10. I'm 23. I've been here for 12 years, and there was a time in my high school years where I would deny that I lived in Somalia. I was born in Somalia, or deny my mother language so that I wouldn't people wouldn't think I'm weird, or I'm good old American, you know what I mean? And so like there was like, and then I lost my voice because I was constantly like afraid I might say something that people will think again that is un-American of me. And so like as I went through, I realized there's this like idea of like immigrants across the board needing to assimilate to American culture when we don't even know what American culture is. There isn't a specific American culture that we need to assimilate to, but at the same time, it's the idea as old as time of like a melting pot. And I want to challenge that idea of like assimilating, you know what I mean? Because like it's us being our authentic selves and us being our authentic like being as we are and walking around. And I live in St. Louis Park, which is like 10 minutes away from Minneapolis, and it's very suburban, it's very middle class, high population of like Caucasians and Jewish families, and it's mainly there's mainly families who are raising their families there.
You're a candidate for city council there, right?
Yes, I am. Mm-hmm. So just like kind of like going back and rediscovering myself and owning who I am, my identities as a Minnesotan, as a Somali person, as an American, as a Muslim person, visibly Muslim woman. My voice came back, and then all throughout my college years, I've been doing like this community outreach stuff that people, and in doing that, I just kind of realized that it is not, well, at least in St. Louis Park, it's not racism, and I think also what you guys were saying, it is not racism, it's like they don't know who you are, and they don't know what you stand for, they don't know what values you stand for, and it's just like, and there's a little bit of ignorance as well of like, and just to kind of, and just building that space, and just one of the main ways to solve that is building a space so there's that line of communication, that line of conversation happening. So like I'm telling my story, you tell your story, and which was a lot of events that happened in St. Louis Park, and like, which is one of the reasons why I'm proud to run for like a city council in St. Louis Park, because it's just like, it seems like a ripe opportunity or a ripe place to kind of build that, okay, you do not need to assimilate, come as you are, we're going to have that conversation.
I do want to hear more about how we tell those stories and how we kind of turn this narrative, and I want to pivot in that direction in a minute, but Halima, I want to come to you particularly on that point, because you are a co-leader of the Muslim Student Association at Hamline University here in the Twin Cities. I wonder how you deal with that among your classmates, because you're right. I mean, there's all these different stereotypes that are floating through the air. Haji, you talked about post 9/11 America. I mean, we Googled, Somali American Minnesota, and some of the articles that popped up, like there was one from Fox News called "How Minneapolis' Somali Community Became the Terrorist Recruitment Capital of the U.S." There was an NPR series in 2009 called "The Somali Minneapolis Terrorist Axis." So there are stories in the news that because they're all that's there, there's nothing else to balance them against. And then you have university students who come in, that's all they've seen, if they've seen anything. And then, Halima, they run into you. Yeah. How do you deal with that? Like, how do you build that space where, how do you deal with that?
So what we aim to do as a Muslim Student Association at Hamline is create that safe space and really engage Muslim students, non-Muslim students at our school to engage in an active dialogue. So what we did recently for the New Zealand massacre, what we did, we had a vigil for the victims, and so we had it was a particularly really it was a difficult event to have. It was beautiful in the sense that so many people from our community came together, and we had that space where we could all be vulnerable. And we read the victims' names out loud, and we talked about their stories. And it was really a moment to remember, because all of us in that moment we shared. It just felt like, especially in the times that we're in right now, with everything just coming down at you, and you feel like you're alone, and especially when something like that happens, something so horrible, when you have a space like that, it was amazing to have. So as an MSA co-leader, that's what we strive to do. We want to have those conversations and create those spaces where people can come together, be vulnerable, talk about issues that matter to them, talk about things that have happened in their past or their experiences that have hurt them, and and really create those spaces when things like that happen, those terrorist attacks, those horrible things that strike our community, to come together and be like, this is how we feel, and we need allies right now.
What was it that got you involved in the Muslim Student Association? Was it something you knew you wanted to do? Was it something you were kind of encouraged to do? Like, what was it that pushed you to be more civically active? Nadia, I'd also like to know about this from you too, but particularly in terms of running for city council. But Halima, what made you decide, I'm going to get involved in this?
So it started building up like in high school when I started learning about social justice issues, because at Hamlin I am a social justice major. I still haven't figured out what I'm emphasizing in yet, but I definitely care about social justice issues. So it happened in high school. I started thinking about what issues matter to people, and why should it matter to me? That's what I started thinking about. Why should it matter to me? And in 2016, when I started freshman year of high school, that was when Trump was elected. And I remember feeling so angry and being like, well, how could this happen? And wanting to really put that energy towards something useful. So I started going to protests, and I saw like Jaylani at those protests and really energizing people. And I was like, I want to be a part of this. This is something good. This is something useful. So that really got me thinking of like how can I be a part of this change. So I was a student at a community college, and that opportunity really let me just figure out where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do. So when I got to Hamlin, I wanted to know that I knew that I wanted to be a part of the social justice, the social justice community there. So there I met Zan Christ, who was the coordinator for Muslim Life there. And she introduced me to the MSA, and she asked me to apply. And I felt really nervous because I didn't think that I could be a part of that leadership role. But what really got me was the opportunity to collaborate with Muslim students there. And not only, I didn't want to like represent their stories, but I wanted to be a part. I wanted to be there as they told their stories. I wanted to give them spaces where they can tell their stories, where they can be handed the mic and be like, hey, tell us about yourself.
I'm going to pick up the pace just a little bit because there's a few more questions I want to get asked before our time is up. But Nadia, what made you decide to run for city council?
I think, like I said, when I was in the process of re-owning myself and kind of recreating who I used to be and what I want to be, I realized that there was no space for the people for the residents of St. Louis Park to connect and to have that connection across the board with your neighbors. And it was becoming a lot more diverse, and it was becoming a lot more the city dynamics was changing. And so the people were kind of either keeping it to themselves or at a loss to like how to better communicate with their new residents. And so and this was at the height of the Black Lives Matter, I realized there was that need for it. Again, I didn't feel like I was part of the community, and as an immigrant, I felt like school is the single most important thing. So like I went to school, came back, and and just kind of like just engaging myself, I went to the St. Louis Park Police Department. I volunteered with them, and we held like events that created this space where people were having honest conversations and how they're feeling and how they felt left out. And then we realized that there was like the city staff and like the city officials weren't part of that conversation. And then the next year when we repeated, it was called the Iftar dinner, but when we repeated that event, we made sure we invited city staff and city elected officials, and just so they can be part of that conversation again, because there was a huge disconnect across the board. And while I was going through this, was a process of like 3 years, I realized again the city dynamics is changing, and the city council people weren't reflecting the city. And it was just, it just seemed like time, and the seat that I'm running for, Tom Miller reached out to me, and he was like, I'm gonna retire, you should run. And I'm like, okay. But I think that was like, it was like one of the things that I just kept saying yes to, that took me to this journey of like constantly saying yes to new opportunities, because I've shut myself down for so long because I felt I wasn't a part of a community, that I felt like I wasn't American enough. And yeah.
I do want to make sure that everyone else in the room knows that we welcome your comments as well. So feel free to, if you want to chime in, just raise your hand. We can move a mic over to you. I also want to make sure we have a chance to talk national politics. We'll come back to you in just 1 second. And I want to make sure we have time to talk, and to you as well. And I want to make sure we have time to talk national politics with Congresswoman Omar, some of the rhetoric from the president. So we'll get to that in just a second, and we'll keep the conversation moving and try to get to as many of you as we can. Mohammed?
Well, Nadia, I have an advice for her in terms of engagement. Your question was, how do we change the narrative? If we want to change the narrative, people to see us, who we are as a Somali, another family in the neighborhood, we have to first of all engage the community, our neighbors. I run a public office, Northeast Minneapolis. Before that, I ran neighborhood association. I didn't get it. I'm fine with it. I'm hopeful I will be running in the future, 4 years from now, 3 years, 2 years, who knows. But my advice to you is, I'll tell you what I did in the neighborhood where I am. You know, when I said focusing the negative aspect will bring a negative, but positive aspect is when you engage your neighbors, tell them who you are. What I have done is 11-11-11. That's when I started my yearly Somali art show in the neighborhood where I live. This is, a family-run business. It is just my family. We don't get grants. We don't, associate with other interest groups. We do it as authentic Somali project, and we share the neighborhood. They will come to know us. When they come to these events, they will ask us questions that they cannot ask you in the bus, at work, in the neighborhood, because you have in that environment, you may have a few people sitting or attending that event, but it grows up because it goes towards to a point where people will share other people. So for me, instead of focusing the negative aspect, what I would like to see the Somali community is to engage the people who they live, their neighbors.
Before we bring in a few more folks in the conversation, I just want you to elaborate on that very briefly, because I hear you in terms of making space for people to ask questions. One of the very first shows that we did that got a gigantic response, we called Ask a Muslim.
Okay.
And it was a tidal wave of very good questions, and people just like, I've never had a chance to ask this, so all the dumb questions that are in my head, sorry, you're gonna hear them. But it was a space we created. I've also heard from people who say, it's not my job to educate you. You should want to know me. I'm the one who is being mistreated, who is being persecuted, misportrayed, discriminated against, and now you want me to build a bridge to you? That's your job. What would you say to them?
Well, that is one aspect to look at it. It may result a solution, but that's not how I use. For me, I engage people. I bring them in. Because when I started this art project, I had a fellow who came to me and said that I can see this whole building and that one over there and another one over there. Everyone is Somali. Windows are closed, heavy curtains, nobody sees them. When they come out, when they go in, they don't say hi, they don't talk to us. So I cannot wait them to know me to come to me, because we are minority in terms of numbers. So for me to to bring a solution, I reached out the community. I bring them in. I created the art show. They will come and ask me. I heard every questions that I can imagine, or you can imagine, that I cannot say some of them, through, this interview, but everybody left satisfied. So Nadia or someone else, and mainly our community leaders, what I want from them is not to focus on the negative aspect, but to reach out the people. Because if you bring a negative to a negative, it won't create a relationship.
I want to hear more about what community leaders and the federal government should be doing, elected officials at every level should be doing to improve the relationship between Somali Americans and the broader mainstream community. But first I want to open up to people who are in our outer ring, and then we'll bring it back into the inner ring, starting with you. Why don't you did you want to? Okay. Well, introduce yourself and tell us what's on your mind.
Hi, my name is Ubah Jama. I am almost born here. Grow up here. I live in city in Minneapolis. I'm a teacher at St. Paul Public Schools. Been working with school system 20 years. I like how you said it. I'm not here to educate you. You come and find out who I am. I'll give you one small, silly question, and funny things, jokes that I did through my schools. 2002, was it 2002? A kindergarten teacher came to me, and she said, "Oh, where's Somalia?" Me, I joke around. I said, "Across Mexico." And then in a public of staff meeting, she said, "Oh, I know where Somalia is. It's across Mexico border." And everybody look, I'm like, oh. She is the best teacher ever that I got to know her after that. The reason I did that is, coming from Somalia, I know where the White House is. I know where the capital is. I know what was the president at that time was. And I was 16 or 15 at that time. As teachers who are educating our kids, when you have a child, you have to Google who are they? Where are they from? Who are they? Where did they have both parents? Did they grow up with Civil War? Have they ever been in the school system? So, as you said, I am tired of educating people. They have to educate themselves first and get to know me well.
It occurs to me that the story that you told, you said was 2002, so we're talking at the very beginning of a post-9/11 America.
Yes.
When there was a real, I think, pressure in a way for us as native-born Americans to educate ourselves really quickly, but we were educating ourselves against a threat, against something we didn't understand that we thought was going to destroy something of our way of life. Mm-hmm. So that must have made it very, checkered in that sense, where it's nice that somebody asked the question, but then there's all this educating to do.
9/11, not only one person suffered on that. I remember vividly as it was yesterday. I walk in a building. I walk in my school that I was going to Concordia, and I take a day off. They gave me a day off because they were afraid of me.
Afraid of you or afraid for you?
For me.
Okay.
Safety. So why did they do that? Because they know who I am. We educate them. They have to educate themselves, people that you work around with. Minnesota is home. My late husband will say, we're not going anywhere. Mm-hmm. We are here. We are here to stay as Minnesotans. But how? And where? And what do we do our younger generation? I have 20-year-old and 24-year-old, especially boys. I don't know if you guys watch that movie, When They See Me. Mm. That's an example. It has nothing to do with Somalis only. It has something to do with color and minority.
The movie about the Central Park Five, When They See Us, the Netflix movie.
When They See
Us,
yes. I haven't even finished it. Okay? So, first and foremost is, who are we first? We have to figure out who are we first, and who are we people that surrounding us. I'm not perfect. I am definitely not perfect. But guess what? We are all human beings, and no one is perfect.
Thank you very much for sharing your story. Much appreciated. If you would pass that mic to the gentleman to your right, if you would introduce yourself, sir, and tell us what's on your mind.
Thank you. My name is Hussein Ahmed. I'm a small business owner, community activist, and also I do consulting for small businesses. I think what I wanted to say before I start is to, first of all, thank the A1 and NPR for hosting this wonderful exchange of ideas. I also wanted to thank your crew, and also Safari Event Center for doing this wonderful event hosting for us. Having said that, I think what I think is it's very important when people from different cultures come together into one place, like America has been doing that since its inception, is that groups that arrive have a little bit of a burden on them, which is more getting to know, being known in that community they came in. And I think I'm totally into the idea that we shouldn't be insular, we shouldn't be isolating ourselves into our malls, mosques, homes, or anywhere else. I think we should come out, celebrate our greatness in America and how we contribute. And there's a lot of good things happening and being done by Somalis and other immigrants in this country. And I think that's what we need to, and we don't have to be defensive either, because our hosts or people we came here to, our fellow Americans, expect us to be such a way, I believe. And of course, there are negative elements in there. There are groups that are also, as Jelani was mentioning, there are other twisted ideas and thinking, but there are a majority of the American people, especially the Minnesotans, are wonderful people. And we need to acknowledge that fact. And I also want to quickly to say that, I'm going to wrap it up. I just wanted to focus on the economic impact of Africans and Somali Americans, including Africans as well as the other immigrants. There are about 12,000 small business owners in Minnesota. That was a report done by Dr. Corey, who is a Concordia professor of economics. And Somalis and East Africans represent the second largest business owners, only second to the Hispanics. Market products and services that Somalis and Africans contribute to this state is about 281 million. And over that, an aggregate amount of income of $800 million is generated by our African immigrants. In this state, we inject over $200 million a year in terms of income. There is about $150 million on philanthropy to various areas of African countries that immigrants do that. And on top of that, there are $14 million that we inject philanthropy in here in this state each year. And there's over $2 billion of income that's generated only the areas that African immigrants concentrate. Minneapolis, St. Paul, Brooklyn Park, and Brooklyn Center. There's most of the African immigrants are concentrated in that area. So we need to acknowledge that $2 billion income per year. So that is the thing I wanted to convey. We need to tell our story. Nobody's going to tell our story. We need to celebrate, teach the American people and the Minnesotans, our fellow Americans and Minnesotans, our side of the story and how we contribute. Just quickly, Lake Street used to be an area that was really known for crime. And
I was just going to ask you about Lake Street, where we are.
We talked about Lake Street used to be, before the arrival of immigrants and Somalis. Jelani also alluded to that fact. Immigrants came, they injected in businesses. They risked the area because we don't do something called geographic casing of where you start a business. For us, it's about opportunity. And East Africans, and especially all immigrants, African immigrants, are highly entrepreneurial in spirit. They go in, they do the job. And I want also to remind people, majority of the entrepreneurs are women in immigrant community, are women. And they're doing wonderful job. Those are the stories we need to tell. We need to tell our narrative. We don't have to be passive and wait others to know. There's no such thing as passive immersion unless you're osmosis. This is very important. We need to tell our stories, and our politicians need to do that as well.
I appreciate
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. And Jelani, I want to come back to you because I'm glad you mentioned that, Hussein, because he and I were talking about that before this event, how remarkable it is that this main corridor here was redeveloped by immigrants. It has that look that I've seen in so many neighborhoods that have been gentrified. And I thought, oh, wow, the people who are here are getting pushed out. No, the people who are here did this. Like, this is a reflection
Absolutely.
of Somali Americans in Minneapolis. And unless someone had told me, I never would have thought of it. I'd like to shift gears to how we pivot the conversation to what you wish more people knew, to the questions you wish more people had answers to, especially, Jelani, because a lot of the dialogue now is about the tweets from President Trump and the threats against Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and kind of her impact as part of the squad in Congress. Talk about that storyline and where you would like to see it go from here.
Well, I wanted to also pick up on the success. I think a lot of people don't realize that the Somali American community, whether they are in Minnesota or across the country, are actually replaying what I believe is the secret sauce for the American experiment here, which is the first generation immigrants are always the most hardest working group of people. But one of the interesting thing is they actually give birth to the most innovative generation, that first generation of immigrants. And so in our community, for example, we have Halima Aden, who changed the landscape of modeling because she refused to remove her hijab and said, I'm beautiful with my hijab. And now she has changed and opened that space. We have Hassan Mead, who runs for the United States Olympic team from here, from Minnesota. We have businesses, young people who are starting businesses. We have Nemo right here, who's running for city council. We have a city council member in Minneapolis and one in St. Paul. And we have this Shiro, Ilhan Omar, who is part of this community, who today is on the front lines of every paper. And I think it's the truth about this community being resilient. But I also caution in this moment that we are in a very unique time in history where I believe the concept of what America and Americans are is being questioned by this president who continues to pray and actually welcome hate into the White House and legislate with Islamophobia and xenophobia and anti-Semitism. And I argue that what's happening to Ilhan is what's happening to Muslims across this country. That anyone who looks like Ilhan is facing that in a much more quieter, less attention and less follow. And I bring that up to her. In fact, my office and all of our care chapters across the country who are on the front lines of challenging Islamophobia every single day get threats. I've gotten threats just this week alone in our office that we had to deal with. And manage. We also take phone calls for Ilhan's office saying it's a threat to Ilhan coming through our office. But in this moment, I think Ilhan represents this district of the 5th District, which is very unique, very welcoming, very progressive, a district that also made history by electing the first African American, first Muslim Congressman Keith Ellison, who's now the first Attorney General, an amazing history. And all of this didn't happen because we said we're just going to wait. I think the relationship and building has to be on both sides, and I think that is what is going to take us over. But I really caution right now that we specifically, I would say, the larger audience that may be listening to this, if you remember the history of Dr. King, in the most critical time of American history of moving civil rights forward, Dr. King did not care about trying to convince the KKK. What he cared about was the average American to see the issues of civil rights to be their issue. And so when Ilhan gets attacked today for being Muslim, it should pain every American, because that's a reflection of who we are. And I think that is where it really need to turn this conversation forward.
Mukhtar, the Sahan Journal was just reporting about threats that Congresswoman Omar has received, that the FBI is now aware of. She's received quite a few, but now there is another round that she has been the target of. Roy Moore, who is running for Senate in Alabama again, recently said that Ilhan Omar should go back to Somalia. I wonder how you see this narrative nationally shifting, particularly because Congresswoman Omar is sort of the center of gravity around which Americans are discussing Somali Americans and kind of exposing whatever their pre-existing views are. How do you see her presence in this discussion? Does she make it easier to have the discussion? Does it make it harder because she's such a lightning rod for so many people? Like, how does she fit into this, in your view?
Yeah, I think Ilhan is someone who is, the first of many things. First Somali politician to represent a district in Minneapolis on a national level, the first Muslim who is wearing the hijab, who is, in Congress. And that's something that not politicians and conservatives and right-wing people are dealing with, but it's something that the media is also struggling with. How can you cover someone like Ilhan? If you read the local papers and the national papers and how they are covering about some of the things that she's saying, some of the policies that she's working on, it's completely different than from her colleagues, because she is this one who has all these boxes to check with. And I think, we are in this moment, as Jelani said, where immigrants are viewed as the other, with the president in the White House who, vilifies immigrants and Muslims, and she represents all the values that most, immigrants and Muslims show in this country, of being resilient, of being not willing to take off a hijab, because she is now in the Congress, and I think she is the one who kind of puts, exposure to all the problems that other minorities are facing.
I'm glad you brought that up. Nadia and Halima, I just want to ask before, and I know we're winding down, but this idea of taking off your hijab to acculturate, Halima, how do you feel about that?
Well, for me, my hijab is part of my identity, and I think that's how it is for a lot of women, Muslim women, who choose to wear the hijab, and of course it's a choice. But for the ones that choose to wear it, because of all the challenges that they face, I think for a lot of them, it makes them even want to wear it. Like it just makes that feeling more strong, because it becomes a part of your identity. All the challenges that you face within it. And for me, a lot of the time, and for a lot of other Muslim women, you're asked like, why do you wear that? And like, aren't you oppressed? And why do you choose to wear that thing? And it could be hard sometimes to just answer, be like, it's my choice, because it's really that easy. It's simple. It's my choice, especially for those who have the choice here. And if it's a hard question. Let me think about that one. It's a hard one.
But I just want to underscore something. I know you said it multiple times, but I just want to say it again. It is you have chosen to wear this hijab.
Yes, I have chosen to wear this. I have chosen.
Nadia, what about you? The idea of removing it or wearing it less to acculturate more. How does that strike you?
I think to me, there's a two-part to this. One thing is like, when you are wearing the hijab, you're either in danger or you're dangerous. So when you are wearing the hijab, you're in danger because they feel like you're oppressed. People will feel like this is not your choice, this is something that's being forced on you. And when you make that clear of a distinction of this is my choice, people then become, you're dangerous. You're with the, So it's like, to me, there's like that, like, maneuvering that I like had to do of like, this is my choice. And I think like, to me, again, this is my identity, and this is also a shield for me. So when I walk into like Target or Cub Foods or like any other like public spaces, people right away will know I am Muslim, and I don't need to explain anything more or anything further than that. To me, it's like I'm out there and I'm proud with it. So it's like, but yeah, like, and then there's the idea of like when I went to my prom, I chose to take it off because nobody was wearing it during prom, but I chose to take it off. And I remember the amount of like wave of compliments I was getting. Oh, you look so pretty. Like, I wasn't pretty before, but now I'm pretty without it, or like people would be like, or they would like see like something, like look at my hair or something, and they'd comment, oh, your hair's so nice, or like something like that. Like, it's just like that like level of like the insecurity that people kind of build in, that you are not good, like you're not pretty, you're not American pretty if you're wearing it. So it's definitely something that you have to like fight every day to feel beautiful in your identity. But it is something I chose, and it's something I definitely like work hard at.
I want to hear from y'all, and Muhammad, I'll come to you in just one second. I want to hear what you would like to turn the narrative into. We've got a conduit to the nation. You've all got a microphone. I'd love to hear, after Muhammad, after you make your comment, what you would like the narrative to shift to, what you would like to hear candidates in 2020 talking about, what people tend to get wrong that you would like to correct, or whatever else that you think would help the rest of America see your community more clearly and treat your community more, empathetically and more appropriately. But Muhammad, let me let you make your comment first, and then we'll come around to that. Go ahead.
I'll say one thing about that, then I will add my comments. First of all, I want to see the Minnesotans to see us that we are another family in the neighborhood. As simple as like that. We are another family in the neighborhood. As simple as like that. It doesn't matter what state, whether you are in Virginia, Minnesota, people who will be listening 100 years from now, this audio recorded, video recorded, conversation about the Somali community. All I'm asking you is to know that we are another family in the neighborhood, as any other family in the neighborhood. Let me go back to the issue of Ilham. As we speak, Ilham has a branch, the other part of this building. And this is the heart of the neighborhood where the Somali community are located. And I haven't seen one Somali community member walking into that particular event. It's all about interest groups, people who generate ideas. What I think, first of all, is it's unfortunate the United States president focusing on Ilhan simply to single out, simply because of her culture, belief system, and all the issues she represents. But the question is she going to invest her time to the community that she represents, or the negative aspect of someone who has plenty of time, plenty of money, plenty of power, that really breathes negative to the immigrants, to the Muslim community. So that's the question Ilham needs to hear tonight. And that's the question that she needs to have an answer. If she wants to be re-elected, she needs to focus on her district. Here, come to Northeast Minneapolis, go to St. Louis. That's where my daughter is, St. Louis High School.
St. Louis Park, yeah.
St. Louis
Park.
School?
That's
Yeah.
where they're attending 9th grade. That's where they will attend.
Oh, okay.
She needs to go to the grassroots. I remember Keith Ellison, whom I campaigned for him and I helped him. He was shaking his hands and I said, look, this is safe. It's liberal neighborhood. What happened? And he said, election is election. Anything can happen. If Ilham wants to help, if she wants to come back, she needs to focus on issues here in Minnesota, particularly her district.
As opposed
But-
to like letting the president pull her into
Into a negative, that he has time and money and efforts, she's wasting her time by going away what she told us and the reason why we elected her. So my advice to her is come back to the community. On the other issue here is, the Somali name is dragged into this negative, narrative. We are here, just a family that cares, their children, raises, family, goes to work 9 to 5, go back home. She is not giving us a good vibe when it comes to, what she's doing. I completely, as a person, I completely disagree with her. What she is doing is not really helping the community. It's bringing more enemies, more problems, more complications, and she needs to really go back to the drawing board.
other thoughts about how to shift the narrative, whether it's Congresswoman Omar or in other respects? Haji?
One of the way I'm trying to change that narrative is by having the podcast and inviting people from different diverse backgrounds to talk about real issues for Minnesota and national level as well.
Repeat the name of the podcast.
The Haji Life. The Haji Life. So I plan to have a conversation with Jelani, Kea, and many other people across Minnesota to just come and really talk about, have a heart-to-heart conversation about where do we want to move next, because everything is just about a matter of time, eventually. The Somali story is a story that is not unique. There is communities that came to this country that had the same struggles, that had it tough. You have the Jewish community, you have the Irish community, you have and among other many communities, right? And one of the two communities that actually really been able to continuously be on a national spotlight is, I think, the Cuban community in Florida and the Somali American community, because they both are very well engaged in the political process in the United States. And Ilhan is one of them as a congresswoman. I think President Donald Trump attacked many of the African communities before even Ilhan became congresswoman. So this is something that started way in 2016. So we can't say,
He wanted to ban Muslims.
right, so this is something that Donald Trump has been, talking about, so we can't say, oh, it's Ilhan's trying to pull this and that, you know. I think Ilhan raises very important questions at this time that we live in, you know, and there's questions that are in dinner tables across Minnesota, and I'm sure on a national level. Like, can we have this conversation in a very respectful way, you know, and in any way to this? And I think now there's a lot of people listening to this, and here is what I want to say. There's a lot of people are getting confused about messages, right and left messages, and those are the loudest at this time and this moment in our country. Those are the two loudest voices that we hear. But I'll say that we have a president that has completely hijacked a platform, a party that used to be progressive, that really cared about humanity, that was in touch with everyday life and people. And they have hijacked the term conservative and what it really means. And I feel like that is not the party of Lincoln anymore. That is not the party of Reagan anymore. That is not the party of people that were really in touch. I'll give you a good example. Ronald Reagan. There was a time in many parts of the world that we were afraid that there was a complete depletion of the ozone layer that was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And scientists all over the world came together and said, we have to do something about this. And I remember, and I watched this on a PBS documentary actually, I remember these people getting together and going to Ronald Reagan, who was a Republican, saying, this is the reality. The ozone layer is getting depleted, and if nothing is done about it, it's going to be really tough. And he listened and became part of international efforts to work on reducing the effects of this, gases that were going out in the atmosphere. So what I'm saying basically is, I think Donald Trump is really distracting from the real issues, and he's using Ilhan, he's using African communities, he's using the LGBT communities, using different communities to really distract from what really matters to us. And it's us to have that conversation.
Let's go to Nadia.
No, I think...
I'm sorry, before you speak, Nadia.
Okay.
If there's anybody else in the room who'd like to chime in. Yes, okay, so we'll go to Nadia, and then I'll get to you, sir.
I think it's worth repeating the messages that these gentlemen were saying. Was one of the most effective ways to change the narrative today is not to focus on the negative, not to focus on what makes us different, but rather with the goal that we're working towards. So like pre-Trump, we put the first black president on, on national level, and we made him president basically. And everybody just kind of was like, well, racism is over, my job is done, I'm gonna rest, And then Trump came into play, and even after Trump, people who were very anti-Trump were like, you know what, he's not my president, and then turned off the TV and then just went their own way. And they were like, I'm done with politics and whatnot. So and again, they're so focused on their hatred that they did not take, that they are so they didn't take any action against it. We're too busy complaining. We're too busy, and it goes across generation. I know they say millennials complain too much, and I think it's like every generation across the board, everybody complains, but rather than just picking up something, doing something, and it might be naive of me to just say, do something. Do anything, go to your neighbors, do anything besides saying he's not prime president or Ilhan is that or anything like that. It's look, hatred hatred has existed as long as humans have. So caring, loving, action, things, just do something is what, yeah.
Before we come to you, sir, I know that our time is running short. There's one question that I want to have everybody answer very quickly, and I want you to fill in the blank to this statement. I really wish more people would ask me blank. I really wish more people would ask me blank. Tell me what that question is, and then tell me how you would answer if they asked you. I really wish more people would ask me blank. Before I get to your answers, let's get to you, sir. Introduce yourself and then tell us what's on your mind.
My name is Fuad. Can everybody hear me? All right. I'm not a great public speaker, but I enjoyed listening to you guys. I felt like I should chime in at this point because I feel as though the conversation is headed to the right direction, which is what we need to do about this now that we have all those issues in place. I personally believe racism is a defining mark of this society. A lot of the problems we're talking about today are rooted into racism. So I have just a general message to my fellow Americans, Minnesotans and otherwise, is to look deeper into your biases, identify the sources of such biases and those stereotypes that somehow seem to be stored in your mind, which may not be your fault. It's probably through generations of mediated messages that had negative impacts on your upbringing and your psychology as a human being, then now that you've bought into these stereotypes. So I just want to speak generally as a, not just Somali American, but just an immigrant who lives in this country and the plights that I have to deal with, which, as well as I speak English, as well as I think I'm acculturated and assimilated to this society, I still find myself to be looked down upon. I'm a college graduate, I have a graduate degree. I can hold conversations to the most intelligent of citizens in this country, but somehow my viewpoints are somewhat less inferior. Just being who I am is automatically a sign of, suspect of some sort. So one of the things that we can do here in Minnesota, it's the government needs to create more funding to create a public PR that helps restore the image of the Somalis in this society. Like newspapers like Sahan should be propagated because those are the ones that are taking, the efforts to correct the negative mediated message that are out there. You mentioned earlier when you had to research Google, all the things that came up were negative stuff. So we have to have that counter voice that countervails that consistent negative ideas about what it is to be a Muslim, American Muslim, Somali Muslim, or African in general. So in Minnesota, our children in our schools are underperforming. Schools where Somali students attend have inferior support. They don't get the same level of stipends from the government. We have the worst levels of health disparities compared to other Minnesotans who are native to the societies. The list goes on. And the common denominator to all of this is that it's us versus them, boils down to racism. I was just telling my wife the other day, I can't imagine if I was African American how I would, behave today, knowing that, through all the civil rights movements and all the things that happened and what my people have sacrificed and all the things that my forefathers did to bring up this country to where it is today, only for me to be continued to be looked down upon and be the source of, just negative outcome at all times. So I think the first thing we need to do is, we need to assimilate. Yes, that's true. But in the same time, Americans need to know that these people who are coming from other countries to live here are enriching this society. They bring a lot of positive, and they need to take one step forward in order for them to be able to come in and then try to be like them more. So,
one quick follow-up, if I could ask, with regards to assimilating or acculturating, where's the line for you? You've certainly acculturated a great deal to mainstream American culture, so you're college educated and so forth. Where's the line for you? Where for you is the limit in terms of how much of your identity you will allow America to kind of rewrite? Like, where's the line for you?
There's no straight, I'm glad you asked that question. So my main thing growing up in this country was trying to protect my identity for who I was, what my parents told me I should be, how I should think. As soon as I exited my home, everything else that was being taught in my school was a direct contradiction to everything I was being taught. And I mean, the schooling system in itself does not help build a sound identity for a black male in this country. So I think a lot of the things that are happening, a lot of Somali youth have some sort of identity crisis. They're being told they are one thing, and then they come out and they try to assimilate with the larger society. And the immediate example they see is, you know, a black male who's in this country, born and raised, speaks English, and that's who they think they should be. So it's that identity crisis that I guess I am a victim of to some level.
Like, because your skin looks like mine, you should act like me.
So to speak. Yeah. So those are stereotypes that are constantly being mediated through TV. You know, you watch a movie, the black guy looks a certain way, acts a certain way. You open the TV, the news, the guy who's doing the bad stuff is the black guy. It's you know, it's all these things that accumulate. So I think identity is an issue for a lot of the Somali youth. And that's why a lot of them end up being on the outskirts. They being victimized by those alternative ideas of people who's trying to push for terrorism or so forth, whatever that is. So it's rooted by racism, not making this person want to be assimilated to a larger society. Therefore, what they do is seek the alternative because you don't want to let them in. So
Can I add something to that question?
Yes, briefly, and then we'll wrap up.
You know, you said, where is the line? I don't think there should be a line because you cannot, you know, you came here and this is the land where people open doors. So it's your responsibility to teach others who you are because they don't know anything. If they were in Somalia, we would expect to teach us who they are. So here is the other way around. Since we are here, we are the ambassadors to ourselves. So that's where the line is. Another comment I want to add here is we cannot compare Ilham to Martin Luther King. He had a different school of thought, comparing what she's doing and what he has done. So that I thought, is a statement that I should correct.
We got to go, but I would like to get an answer from everybody to that last question. Anyone else here who would like to answer that question as well? So, finally, I'd love to know how you would answer that question. I really wish more people would ask me blank. What's that question and what would your answer be? Jaylani, let me start with you. And if you just keep it very brief, we'll make our way around the circle real quick. I really wish more people would ask me blank. Jaylani?
How am I feeling? How are you feeling? I feel we are in a time where we are not talking to each other. We are so polarized in this nation. We have MSNBC and Fox News audiences who are not patient enough to empathetically listen to each other. If we listen to our feelings, our needs and wants, I think we realize that we can solve a lot of these problems that politicians have used to divide us. And so, for people who are listening today, I encourage you to come on down to our wonderful state. This is a beautiful state that has a vibrant community, probably the best food you can find in the country, probably some of the best people, and you're going to see a very visible Muslim population, and say hello and we'll have a conversation.
Especially that table I'm still eyeing that table. I have not forgotten about it. Muhammad, I really wish more people would ask me.
Well, as simple as I said before, we are here in Minnesota and we are another family in the neighborhood. All I want, my neighbors across the board, the state, the whole United States, all I want them to know is to ask me that we are another family, similar to the family right next to the building where I live. As simple as like that. It will give them full identity. It will give them full information they want to, and it will give them comfortability to understand that we are part of the neighborhood.
Nadia, I really wish more people would ask me,
why are you running at the height of all this hatred, all this Ilhan Omar, Trump? Why are you running?
And your answer would be?
Because I'm awesome.
Yeah. Duh.
Because I can is my American right, but no, because I think it's now more than ever that I need to run.
Halima, I really wish more people would ask me.
To listen to their stories. I think right now, the times that we're living in, we need to listen to each other. And stories are vital so that we can work on what makes people think the way they do and challenge our biases.
Haji, I really wish more people would ask me.
I would like to say, maybe I will say something that is American, most of the listeners can relate to. Any American movie, opening scene, you see a shot moving into a neighborhood, a new neighbor has moved in, the whole neighborhood bring out the pancakes or the donuts or whatever, and they go door knocking and say, welcome to the neighborhood. They don't know if this neighbor is a nice guy or is a serial killer. They don't know, but they're curious, right? They want to know who's moving into a neighborhood. So I think that's where we need to start our conversation, is when we are at this place right now, where we are, we need to be curious about who we are, who is our neighbor. If anybody moves into my neighborhood and I have 3 children, I would like to know who that person is.
And
so be curious.
And Mukhtar, I really wish more people would ask me.
Well, I'm not an opinion guy. I'm a journalist, so I report the news. But I think I wish more people will ask me about Islam. I think that's one of the most misunderstood religion in America, and I will, educate people if they ask me about that and how beautiful the religion is.
Can I add one more?
Sure. Jelani, go ahead.
When is Coming to America #2
coming out?
I think that movie,
classic. It's
for a lot of us immigrants,
we can relate.
Africans, we relate so much to it. We
Really?
all,
Yes.
yeah. I mean, Eddie Murphy did a great job on that, and
See, I always thought that Coming to America was one of those movies that was kind of on the bubble, because
it told our story at an early time where people just could not relate to us, and we all wanted to be kings from Africa that landed
and see,
here.
I was always worried that, like, you see that movie and there's Hakeem like, I have recently been placed in charge of garbage.
Yeah.
Do you have any that requires disposal? I wasn't sure if I was allowed to laugh at that.
But he is there.
One of the best thing about that movie is, like, in Africa we were living lives, you know what I mean, worth living, and then you come here and then you realize, okay, I'm now working at McDonald's when I used to be a doctor in Africa, you know what I mean?
McDowell's.
McDowell's.
The Golden Arcs, not the Golden Arches.
But the thing is this, there's Hakeem and the other guy.
Semi.
Semi spends a lot of money and throws money around, and Hakeem is trying to restrain him. That's the African story in America as well. You have communities that come here and restraining and work hard and do all these things and penny pinching and all that, and then you have people that want to spend money, flashy, and show all these things. So I think, like Jelani said, it's something we very much, and I wish I was in the cast too. I would love, I would love to be in the next cast of Coming to America too.
Let's not mix up stuff here. We are not, same narrative with them. We are refugees. We came here as a refugee. Yeah. This is the country that gave us a second chance. I would never had.
But we have our own Wakandas.
I would never have a chance to get a graduate degree if I wouldn't be here. I would not even have a bachelor degree if I wouldn't be here. So their narrative is completely different than us.
I'm only going to thank the Native Americans because they welcomed us, to be honest with you. And they're the only ones who have a right to welcome anybody.
What I've taken away from this and what I like about this is that there are so many different stories. And I think the fact that there are differences of experience, differences of opinion, hopefully will kind of break up the ease with which we can just say, oh, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar is like the embodiment of all things Somali. Clearly that's not the case. I think a lot of us have learned a great deal, not just about your stories, but about the broader stories of the communities from which you hail. And I hope that when Coming to America 2 is on its way, that they do a big rollout in the Twin Cities. If they know what's good for them, if they want to make any money, they need to show, and Black Panther 2 also, they need to show, because I don't know anybody whose skin looks like ours who did not immediately want to be part of Wakanda.
Exactly. I think that was like the move, like literally all throughout Wakanda, everybody was just crossing their arms like, Wakanda forever, and then,
But I like the fact also that, we've been able to touch on this idea that just because our skin colors are similar doesn't mean our stories are the same, and that there's a difference between kind of acculturating, getting used to where you are, and assimilating, like giving up who you are and going along to get along. And I appreciate you all sharing that piece of your story, contextualizing it, opening your minds, opening your hearts, and hopefully opening more minds and hearts as well. So thank you all very much for making time for us. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Class dismissed.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Sambusa.